What you're looking at is Graceful Explosion Machine, and it's one of 3 games we're going to be talking about in this episode of the Shoot 'em Up Show. This is the show where we check in with those crazy developers who are still busting their butts to give us fresh new shooters. Today's entries include an early access look at JASEM, just another shooter with electronic music, a review of the long-overdue current-generation port of Bleed, and, of course, the aforementioned Graceful Explosion Machine. So heed the warning siren, because this is the Shoot 'em Up Show. Old school shooters were never known for having deep and involving storylines. We normally got a text crawl at the start and a congratulations screen at the end, and that's about it. But JASEM, just another shooter with electronic music, doesn't even go that far. There isn't a cinema to watch or a short blurb to read, because this is little more than a game where you shoot enemies and make things explode. If you're looking for some sort of character motivation or a deeper meaning, then this is not the game for you. But don't be fooled by the name. This is more than just another shooter with electronic music. JASEM is an early access game that shows real promise, and I already like some of the subtle changes they've made to the dual-stick genre. The goal is to move from one isolated platform to the next while taking down waves of enemies. You'll need to explore the procedurally generated mazes in order to open up new gates and construct bridges. One of the things I like about this game is how you're actually moving pieces into place in order to create the checkpoints. There are a lot of times where you'll have to focus on killing enemies while you're fiddling with levers and constructing the bridges. They do a lot to toy with this idea in the later stages, making the checkpoints a little harder to obtain. It helps that the gameplay is quick and the shooting is precise. Our unnamed robot hero races around the stage with a primary and secondary attack, dodging bullets with one analog stick and aiming with the other, or using the keyboard and mouse if you prefer. It's simple, yet effective. There are a bunch of red barrels to explode and obstacles to dash through. I also like that you can knock parts of the level over and push objects around. What I don't like is how certain enemies will come out of nowhere and kill you without warning. There are a few enemies that feel grossly overpowered, forcing players to rely on trial and error exploration. And on the topic of exploration, it's entirely too easy to fall off the narrow platforms. It's a combination of the handling being a little loose and our robot recoiling after every shot that sometimes makes it feel like you're being pulled towards the edges. JASEM, just another shooter with electronic music, surprised me. It still has a few weeks to go in early access, so I'm eager to play through the final game and see what they've tweaked. With any luck, they'll make it harder to fall off platforms. I mean, seriously. I don't want to insult Bill and Lance, but I often find that the least interesting part of most run-and-gun shoot-em-ups is the action hero. Don't get me wrong, I love Contra and Gunstar heroes, but it's not because of the deep character development. That's not the case with Bleed. For what may be the first time ever, I found myself actually connecting with the main star of a run-and-gun shooter. It's a young girl named Rin who spends her days drinking milkshakes and writing down awesome video game ideas. That's exactly what I did as a kid, and I would have done just about anything to be the star of this kind of action game. Rin dreams about saving the day in an old-school run-and-gun shooter full of big bosses and even bigger laughs. This is probably the funniest shoot-em-up I've played in a long time, as it spends a lot of its time breaking down the conventions found in this type of game. It's not just funny, but also full of heart-pounding action. Every level throws something new at the player, and those bosses I just mentioned are so much fun to go up against. At its core, Bleed is a mix of Contra and Max Payne. It controls like a side-scrolling dual-stick shooter, but also allows the player to slow down time like it's the Matrix or something. I like that going into bullet time allows Rin to basically fly through the air as she targets enemies. The game does a good job of incorporating this mechanic into the boss fights, especially if you venture into the harder difficulties. Now, if Bleed looks familiar, it could be that you played it on a number of other systems in the last 5 years. This was originally an Xbox Live indie game, but it recently found its way to both the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. While I love that the shooter is expanding its reach on newer consoles, I wish that it would have been packaged with the sequel. Like a lot of these run-and-gun shooters, it's over far too quickly, and I'm not real sure how often I'm going to want to go back. Although it's not as long as I would have liked, I still had a great time fighting through the diverse levels and taking down the fun bosses. Bleed captures what's great about those old games, all while doing something different with the genre. Rin is a cool character with an active imagination, and I couldn't wait to see what she would think up next. Look, Bleed is worth playing for the ending alone. Have you ever played a game that left you asking the question, is that all there is? That's how I felt while playing Graceful Explosion Machine, a colorful new shooter from Vertex Pop. Even though I liked the look, the controls, and shooting through the levels, I kept waiting for the game to open up and show me something special. But that never happened, and instead we're left with a spark of what could have been a great game. Graceful Explosion Machine comes to us from the people behind We Are Doomed, another throwback shooter that left me wanting more. What we have here is a side-scrolling shooter where we're stuck in a small, looping arena and have to fight off waves of killer enemies. It's a little bit like Fantasy Zone, only this time it's underground and not as friendly. What sets Graceful Explosion Machine apart is that there are 4 different weapons mapped to the 4 face buttons. We get the typical blaster that always fires at the same rate, a high-powered sniper beam, a whole bunch of homing missiles, and an energy sword for close-range attacks. But while each of these weapons may have a use, they also take a lot of energy. The idea is to be careful with your shots and make sure to pick up the items to fill up your energy gauge. I like the fast-paced gameplay, the claustrophobic stages, and the different weapons. What I don't like is that they don't push the concept beyond what you see in the first few levels. The truth is, every level plays out exactly the same way. The bad guys and color schemes may change, but you're always fighting off 3 waves of enemies. I found that the repetition got to me, which isn't a complaint I normally have with 2D shooters. It's not that Graceful Explosion Machine is a bad game, but rather that it largely squanders a cool look and unique gameplay. Instead of building on some great ideas, Vertex Pop simply hit the copy-paste buttons and gave a stage after repetitive stage of sameness. This is a developer that definitely knows how to start a shoot-'em-up. The problem is, they don't know where to go from there. Hey, thanks for watching the second episode of the Shoot 'em Up show. So here's the question of the day. Do you still like dual-stick shooters? I know that sounds like a leading question, but I really want to know. I mean, I go back and forth on this, but I still like them. Seems like somebody is always doing something new with it. In other news, I'm working on reviews. What reviews? I don't know. I guess you'll find out. And with that mystery, I recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.